Hi, everybody. Welcome to the session about building a data value chain and using it to make data-driven decisions in your company. First of all, I wanted to say a big thank you to the Data Innovation Summit for organizing this virtual conference, and also to Looker and Fivetran for inviting me over to actually do this presentation. I was supposed to do this in real life, or physically, so to say, in January. Unfortunately, that couldn't happen, but I'm still very happy that we can do this now virtually. Not only because I'm happy to present myself, but I'm also very eager to attend some of the other very interesting sessions that were supposed to happen at the conference. So without further ado, let's get into it. I'll give you quick words about who I am. I'm Nicolaas Wagenaar. It's a very Dutch name. I count 4 A's in there, 5 A's. So I usually get a lot of comments about that. I'm the business intelligence manager at Falcon.io. And what that means is that I head up the BI team and basically responsible for our entire operational data infrastructure and also the reporting and decision-making that comes out of that. I've been with the company for about 5 years. And through that, I've kind of gone through all the stages of data maturity. When I started, we had a lot of data silos. I myself started with the sales operations team. And every team in the company was kind of doing their own thing. Lots of spreadsheets, lots of random notes, people keeping their own tabs. When I joined full-time, I started as a part-timer. When I joined full-time, we got a Series B and decided we need to be a bit more serious about data. So it became my job to build up our data infrastructure, get rid of those data silos, and also set up a centralized reporting framework so that we could have some unified reporting across the company and start talking about customers, start talking about prospects instead of Salesforce contacts or Marketo companies and stuff like that. I'll get into all the details about what I've done and how we utilize Looker and Fivetran and modern BI technology in a sec. But before that, let's quickly walk through the agenda. So I'll give you a quick intro to Falcon. What kind of company are we? And also, I think important to know what kind of business model do we run? And why do we use the tooling that we use? Then, as part of building up this data value chain, I want to talk about the different components that make it up. So I'll start with asking the right questions. And this really is a prerequisite to anything you do in data. Whether you use modern BI or traditional BI or really anything, start with asking the right questions. Otherwise, you're just off to a false start. The second would be building trust in data. And this is super important because we've been through stages in our data journey where we had a lot of flashy dashboards and we had lots of bells and whistles going on. But because we had so much, it wasn't always correct and it was difficult to maintain. And when you start to lose trust, people just fall back to what they're used to. So they start making their own spreadsheets again and start trusting their own notes instead of all the work that you've put into building a centralized data framework. So that's super important. The last part is, when you have asked the right questions, when you have built the trust, how do you make data accessible? And this is kind of a two-way story. This is partially about, people actually being able to view reports, being able to view dashboards. But it's more importantly about people being able to understand what's going on and people being able to relate a report to the actual business process that it's supposed to represent. So let's get right in and start talking about Falcon a little bit. So we at Falcon, we build and sell social media management software. And as the tagline here says, we pride ourselves on being the unified platform for social media and customer experience management. What we really mean by that is that we are kind of an all-in-one tool, the last stop you need, basically, in your social media management journey. More specifically, we have a bunch of modules, product modules that allow you as a customer to manage everything you need when it comes to social media and more particularly manage your customers through social media. So we have publish to schedule content across channels and across networks. We have engage to respond to comments on your content. We also do DMs through engage. We have advertise for paid. Listen allows you to listen in to what people are saying all across the web. This actually spans beyond social. Measure, very important one, which is to track how things are doing. Right? You need to be able to see how you are performing in order to make the right decisions on what to plan next. And as kind of a layer throughout all of this, we have audience, which keeps track of the social profiles of the people that interact with you. And it's a pretty powerful tool in that if you recognize someone on Twitter and the same person on Facebook, you can start to connect them together. And over time, you build up a profile of the people that interact with you, giving you the insights you need for any kind of follow-up interaction you might have with them. We also recently acquired a company called OnMetric, and that allowed us to add a new module called Benchmark. And benchmarking allows you to measure the performance of similar brands of other companies out there, and then benchmark them to your own performance. So if you are a drinks brand, for example, you can look up any other drinks brand or a similar brand to you and see what their social performance is, what kind of content do they post, how do people react to that, and then use that information when you plan your own campaigns. What's good to know is that we are a SaaS business. So subscription-based means new business obviously is very important, but maybe even more important is renewals, making sure that nobody churns. And we're online, I think, as most businesses are nowadays. So for us, being kind of a cloud native company, it makes sense whenever we procure software to look in the cloud. We don't really have anything on premise. And that's really where Looker and Fivetran come in, but I'll talk more about that in a second. So to begin, let's talk about asking the right questions. And as the subheader here says, this is all about translating your business goals into metrics. Now, whenever we talk about asking the right question, we kind of keep these 3 pointers in mind. The first one is about honesty. A good metric needs to be honest. I think everybody will have heard the term vanity metrics. Those are pretty bad. I mean, they're good to look at, and that's really all they do. So nobody benefits from good-looking numbers that don't tell you the truth. The truth can be ugly sometimes, but it's better to know what's really going on than to have a number that just makes you feel good. It seems a no-brainer, but it's really easy to slip into looking at vanity metrics. The second one would be about actionability following accountability. And what I mean by that is that if multiple people or multiple entities in the company are responsible for the same metric, it's very easy to shift blame to another party. You need to have some kind of ownership over a metric in order to make people or teams or entities in the company responsible for them. That's super, super important, very good to keep in mind. Again, it's really easy to kind of slip into that anti-pattern and just have a metric that many different teams actually contribute to. But when you notice that, try to see if you could break it down and see if you can give each individual team their own metric to be responsible for. And it will make your decision-making down the line a lot easier. The third point would be about complexity. This one is a bit more difficult to grasp, or difficult to identify, I should say. But what we notice every now and then is that there are some metrics that might be very accurate, and they might actually tick the first two, so they're not vanity metrics, and they have a lot of accountability. But sometimes they're just difficult to understand. And if you don't know what action needs to be taken in order to improve a metric, then it's not a very actionable metric. It's not a very powerful metric. So for me, and this is a bit of a controversial take, but me personally, I'm not a huge fan, for example, of an overall customer health score. Because usually that is a combination of things that happen across the company. So that could be how do they perform in the product? How was the sales cycle? How are they interacting with support? There's maybe sometimes a qualitative component where the CSM or the AM might indicate sentiment for this customer. And all this is kind of grouped together, and then the number comes out and says this is a good or a bad customer. It's great in telling you what it is, but it's not so great in telling you what do you need to do in order to improve it. Are they bad because they're not using the product? Are they bad because they're missing a feature? Are they bad because they had a bad onboarding experience? I would always propose to split them up, look at those components individually, because then you can still tick those first two boxes in having an honest and accountable metric, but you can also make it less complex and thereby more actionable by knowing exactly what needs to improve in which scenario. So these three together, if you keep those in mind, you can build actionable metrics, and that's the first step in building this data value chain. Then the next part, once you have your metrics defined and you've asked the right questions, now you want to get your data into a central location. You want to be able to work with your data. And this is where, for us, Fivetran comes in. We use Fivetran to pipe data from all of our SaaS tools into Amazon Redshift, which is our data warehouse. The tools we use, just to give a quick overview, a bit of context here, we use Salesforce, Marketo, NetSuite, Zendesk, Intercom, and I might be missing one or two, but I think those are the main tools that we use. For us, Fivetran is a game changer because it's the most straightforward ETL tool that is out there. Or actually, I should say ELT. I keep going back to ETL, but it is really an ELT. So it's an extract, load, transform, meaning that what you see is what you get. But let's get into a little bit of the details of what makes Fivetran interesting to us. So ELT, extract, load, transform, it's a very appealing model because of its simplicity. It took me a little bit of time to get into it because I always thought, well, you take your data out, you transform what is needed, and then you drop the final result in your warehouse, and that's what you query. But with ELT, basically what Fivetran does is it copies the source data as accurately as possible into your data warehouse. So if you look at Salesforce and you look at the data schema that exists in there, Fivetran pretty much replicates that one-on-one. So now your Salesforce source schema exists in Redshift as well. Same goes for Marketo, the same goes for any other connector they have. And why this is nice is it allows you a lot of flexibility in that you can do any transformation you want on the fly. This is possible because modern data warehouse technology allows us to do these kind of queries without taking a lot of time. I won't go into the details of why modern data warehouses are good. There's lots of content written about that. But I think for now it's good to know that a Redshift, a BigQuery, a Snowflake, they're all able to handle billions of rows of data, within minutes, usually seconds. And that means that you can have that flexibility. So you can start with your source data as raw as possible and just build your transformations on top of that and basically run them all ad hoc in your data warehouse. So that's ELT. Fivetran is not the only one that does ELT, but a couple of things added to that made it very appealing to us. So the biggest one actually is the collection of connectors. Whenever you look at an outsourced data pipeline provider, really what you want is you want to make sure you just need one. You don't want to be dealing with 2, 3, maybe 4 different tools to be able to get all the integrations that you have. So for us, one of the reasons we chose Fivetran is because they had the largest collection of connectors. They had all the tools that we were using. So it was kind of a no-brainer to say, well, this is what we need. Another point, this became clear during the trial with us, with Fivetran, that we had with Fivetran, is the Marketo integration. So Marketo is notorious for having a bit of a difficult to work with API. If anyone has ever done that, they probably recognize that. So what Fivetran has done is they invested a lot of time and effort to work with this API and make sure that this integration is as good as it can be. And you really notice that if you are still in the process of picking an ETL or ELT tool, compare how Fivetran integrates Marketo to how any other competitor does that, and you'll probably see that it just makes more sense. The results are more accurate, there are fewer bugs, and all in all, it's a much more one-to-one representation of what's actually going on in your Marketo instance and what ends up in your data warehouse. The other thing, Fivetran really is set it and forget it. Because it's ELT and because no transformations happen along the way, the moment you've set up your connector, you can trust that this data will be replicated at a set interval. You can choose the interval if you want. You can do, I think, hourly, maybe even shorter than that, or you can do it once a day if that's what you need. But it's once you've set it, you don't really need to think about it anymore unless it goes wrong. But it doesn't go wrong that much. So I don't really go into Fivetran all that much, and that's actually a good thing. And the final point, this is more kind of an added bonus. The CSV uploader is super useful for ad hoc tasks. So whenever someone comes to me and says, hey, I have a list of IDs and I want you to, give me this commercial information that I cannot get from my source tool, then, it's a pretty easy task to do. But if you just have a list of IDs somewhere, it's either going to be a very long query, say if it's 1,000 IDs. But what I could do now with the CSV uploader, I just plot them all in the CSV, upload them into Fivetran or through Fivetran into Redshift. Now I have a table that I can join to, and it's a matter of writing an SQL query that takes less than a minute. So that makes the process of dealing with ad hoc tasks a lot more easy, and it's just a nice to have. Then moving on, now that the data, the Fivetran makes sure that our data is trustworthy, and we have that foundation to work off of. Let's talk about making data accessible to people. And this is, as Looker often mentions as well, it's about democratizing data. And what we do is we use Looker primarily because we found that LookML is a very good match for Fivetran's ELT model. So where Fivetran is great in replicating the data as is, Looker, especially through its LookML language, is perfect for defining the data in ways that the business understands. And what I mean by that is when you talk about a Salesforce account, and when you talk about a Zendesk organization, maybe a NetSuite entity as well, that's all source data. When you speak to a sales manager or when you speak to a finance manager, they don't really care that this is a Salesforce account or that is coming from NetSuite or whatever. They want to talk about prospects. They want to talk about customers. They need the data to represent what's going on in the business. And having kind of a modeling layer between your raw data and your final reporting layer is super powerful because you can define the business entities through LookML and thereby create a data model that represents what's going on in your business without having to rely too much on your business managers knowing what the underlying tools look like. And that is a large part of what goes into making data accessible. It's that people understand what a number in a report means and that they can relate that to whatever part of the business they are actually working on. So that's a big one. The next thing, what we like about Looker and what's very usable for us in making data accessible would be the exploration engine. So because LookML allows you to define a data model, that then allows you on top to build this exploration engine, allowing people to just drag and drop and kind of build up their own queries without them having to know the underlying source tools, and also without them having to know any kind of technical language like SQL or Python or whatever data processing language you would use. This is powerful because I've been in many situations where you deliver a report to a stakeholder and they instantly have a follow-up question. That's good. That means that they're engaging with the content you provide to them. If you're not in a flexible position, that means you might need to go back, write a new query, and the whole process of dealing with stakeholders becomes a lot more slow. Having this exploration engine, I can sit down with the stakeholder, present the report. The moment they have a question, I can instantly go in, change a few parameters, and give them the new answer based on their question. This all comes from the separation of this modeling layer from the underlying raw data. But another cool feature is that the modeling layer is also separate from the visualization. So whenever you have reports built, whenever you have dashboards built, what sometimes happens is that some field might change in Salesforce, or the definition of a field might change due to a definition in the business process. What we can do through LookML is, in the background, just change the LookML to reference the new field in Salesforce or to reference the new definition of something in Salesforce. But we don't actually have to change the visualizations because the exposed layer that the visualization is built on doesn't change. So this makes it super easy to keep up to date with any kind of operations or any updates to the business operation, updates to the business system as they happen, as your company changes. But you don't actually have to constantly update the visualizations to your stakeholders, meaning you can keep the consistency there, which ultimately benefits the data-driven decision-making by making sure that things don't change too often. And then again, as an added bonus, chat support on Looker is really good. We already noticed this during our trial with them. Whenever you have a question, I have never seen them offline, and they usually respond within seconds. So it's just nice to know that that help is always there. Whenever you run into something, they're always there to help out. So I have a few more words on what specifically we do at Falcon with Looker in order to get the most out of it. So I already mentioned LookML. You know, and I can't really stress this enough. We leverage this heavily to make sure that our source data represents our actual business processes. And again, this is one of the most important things because your stakeholders don't care about your source systems. What they care about is the sales process. What they care about is the marketing process. They care about being able to look at the lead funnel. They don't care about how you build up the lead funnel by combining 7 different systems. LookML and Looker allows us to take all that complexity, deal with it in the background, and provide our stakeholders with the business processes that they're used to. Now, in order to do this well, there's a couple of things that we keep in mind. A couple of things we keep in mind to build a good Looker instance. And one of the things would be to create simple and focused explores. And this is key in making data accessible. And again, making sure that people find the metrics actionable and find them easy to understand. If you have a reporting environment that has 100 different fields to choose from, it's very easy to get lost. It's very easy to pick combinations that don't make sense. And in general, it's just very easy for people to give up on it and go back to their spreadsheets. If instead you can provide a reporting environment where you only have the key fields that are relevant and you have maybe a bunch of key dimensions that you could use to give extra context to the main metrics, that will be much more engaging for any business stakeholder as it gives them a feeling that they know what they're doing. It gives them a feeling that they fully understand the reporting they're working with. And thereby, usually, at least that's what we noticed, it improves engagement with the tool. Speaking of engagement, we also noticed that not every stakeholder has the same engagement level. There are very data-driven people around the company, and there are people that trust more in their gut and trust their own notes better than any kind of data-driven reporting tool. It's very important to recognize that and then find the right engagement level for each stakeholder that you work with. So some, they want to go into and explore, and they want to start analyzing their data, hands-on. They want to be able to answer questions themselves. Others, they just want a dashboard to look at. They want to open that once a day, and they want it to be correct. And if you recognize the engagement level, you know who to spend time on, teaching to explore, for example, and who you just need to give a report, check in every now and then to see if all still goes well. If you don't do this, you'll realize that there's going to be frustration on both ends. People who really don't want to learn how to explore data, they're going to get annoyed if you keep, nagging them to do that. And you're going to get annoyed as a BI manager or as an analyst in trying to get them to do that. Similarly, you don't recognize that there are other people out there that really do want to explore and want to get hands-on, then you might be missing out. So basically what I'm trying to say is don't paint with a broad brush. Find kind of the individual data, the data personalities of each of your stakeholders, and then match the engagement level to that data personality. And as kind of an extension of that, I would also recommend you go and find data champions. These are the people that are super engaged. They're usually the kind of people that want to get hands-on. But if you find and identify them, you can actually utilize them to spread the word within their departments or within their teams. So the data champion of, they say, the sales team could be the point of contact for anyone who is a little less engaged, so that they don't have to go directly to BI. And that way the BI team can focus more on making sure that the data is correct, can focus more on optimizing the connection between the systems and the business processes, and overall build a better data infrastructure. And then you can kind of feed that back to your data champions, and they feed it back to the kind of the rest of the organization. For us, this is a super powerful model, as it allows us, or everybody in different parts of the company, to make the most out of the time they work with data. So when you bring this all together, we have the data value chain. And as you see, it's a fairly simple model if you put it all on one slide. But it is really good to keep in mind, and it's also good to identify where in the data value chain you are, and maybe if you've skipped a step. So that first part, right, the prerequisite here, is asking the right questions, identifying your core performance metrics. If you notice that you're already working on your data collection, but you haven't even done that yet, you're going to be in trouble. The second step, if you have asked the right questions, you need to make sure that your processes and your system output the right data. If you have systems that are a mess, if you have systems that are inconsistent, you're not going to get solid data at the end of your pipeline. You need to make sure that your systems are correct, that your data makes sense before you even try to extract it. The data collection, in our case, and it could be in your case as well, if you pick a right ELT provider, it should be very simple. It's very straightforward. You pull it out. What's good, and so you pull it out and you just plop it into your data warehouse. What's good to keep in mind, though, is when you do this, make sure that there is that parity between your data and your process. So make sure that you don't do too many weird things along the way to ensure that your data doesn't represent the underlying source anymore. Try to just do it one-on-one, and then allow, whatever tool you end up using as your reporting layer, allow that to do the right transformations and to combine the right data sets in order for your data to represent the actual business processes. And then the final step, we talked about this a lot, it's about making data accessible, right? You get that dynamic reporting. Now, if you do this well, once the data is made accessible, this is used to make decisions. And those decisions probably result in changes to your business processes. And that's where this becomes a loop, right? So once changes happen in your business process, you probably want to start measuring something else. That basically means you go through the data value chain again. Once you've been working with this framework a little bit, it becomes quite fluid, and you don't distinctly go through each step, but you might build up a data pipeline or a data processing framework that allows you to kind of fluidly move through it. For us at Falcon, whenever we work on data projects, we always just keep tabs on where are we in this value chain, and are we still in the right order, or did we skip a step? Do we need to maybe go back and make sure that we go through each and every step individually? What I want to do to end this session is give you a concrete example of how we use this at Falcon. And what I want to talk about now is a project that was kicked off by one of our CSMs. And he wanted to be able to quantify churn risk. And specifically, he wanted to be able to give a monetary churn risk value to some of the feature requests that are on the product roadmap. The good thing to know before I get into this is that we already had a process in place that allowed CSMs, that allowed salespeople, AMs as well, to tag customers as wanting a certain feature. So we have our product roadmap. We have lots of feature requests on there already. What people can do through Salesforce or Gainsight, which is what we use for customer success operations, what they can do is they can find a feature request or create a new one and tag a customer to it. So that could mean that for a specific feature request, you might have 10, 20 customers that want the same thing. And maybe there is a, kind of a rogue new feature, and maybe only one customer might be tagged with that. A problem with this is that it wasn't always clear whether the customer just wanted this as a nice to have, or whether this was something, that they really needed to, and maybe even if they churn, if it's not there. So what this project was all about is making sure that we identify those feature requests that explicitly have been mentioned as a churn risk. And if they are, then we tag them and we want to measure them. Now, how this worked in the data value chain, it all started with the question, right? What is the value of these feature requests? And we narrowed it down to make it a bit more actionable by specifically focusing on the churn risk. So what do we have to lose if we don't deliver on this feature request? The second part in the process management, we had part of that already in place. So we already had the framework to be able to identify feature requests. We made a change here in the systems to allow CSMs to mark things specifically as a churn risk. And in addition to making the change in the system, we also made an explicit definition of what is a churn risk, which in our case means that a customer has explicitly mentioned to the CSM that they will leave if we don't deliver on this feature. So we have both on the business process side as well on the system side, a very clear definition of what a churn risk feature is. And with that in place, we used Fivetran to have the integration between Jira and our data warehouse and make sure that any of these feature requests that come in, we would have them in our data warehouse, and we'd be able to combine that with commercial data that we have in Salesforce as well. So we're basically step 3 now. We've done the data collection. The last part would be to take the data that we have in Jira on feature requests, combine that with the data that we have in Salesforce, where we have the commercial information, and we can start to actually give this a monetary value. And I have taken a quick screenshot of what that looks like in Looker. Now, obviously, this is obfuscated because I can't give you info on what our actual feature requests are. But this is the actual Explorer. The only thing I changed was just the text and the monetary value here. So what you'll see on the left, if you're used to Looker, if you've worked with it before, you got all the the fields you can choose from. The top, we have a bunch of filters set up. In this case, what's good to know is we have this is churn risk filter that you see at the top. We use LookML to look through the feature requests, find the ones that have been tagged as a churn risk, and create this field that says is churn risk. That allows us to split any metric by whether or not it is a churn risk. We have a couple of filters to make sure that we want to look at only customers. In this case, that makes sense because prospects cannot churn. And we also have a filter for looking at the renewal fiscal quarter to basically zoom in on a specific cohort of customers that's up for renewal soon, and then look at what the monetary value of their churn risk is. So in this case, we look at MRR. And what we can see is that in our Q3 2020, for this specific feature, we'd have that specific amount of MRR at risk. And this is the sum of MRR of all the customers that have marked that feature as a must-have, otherwise they would churn. And for us, this is super powerful to inform sort of engineering decisions and inform our product managers what they should be working on. Because before that, it was always kind of, it was very difficult to figure out what is the work actually worth, right? We know that a lot of people want this. Will we really get more customers from this? Will we really prevent churn? Due to following the process of the data value chain and going through each of these steps individually, we've been able to build a structured framework around quantifying churn risk. And this is something that we now have in use and bring into all the product management meetings in order to see if we need to reprioritize an issue that might have been lower down the roadmap before. That's all I had today. I hope it was useful. I hope I've been able to explain not only how we work with data at Falcon, but also how we utilize some of the modern BI tools that are out there, particularly Looker and Fivetran, of course, and how you can fairly easily build something up like this yourself as well. The entry costs are really low. Everything is in the cloud. You can just get started. You don't have to buy everything instantly yourself. You can build it up in a modular way. And then if you follow the framework that I've described, I'm certain that you'll be able to start making data-driven decisions yourself really quickly. Now, since this is a virtual session, unfortunately, there isn't a Q&A. But if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me. You can see my email on the slide here, nicholas@falcon.io, or just look me up on LinkedIn and shoot me a message there. Thanks very much for attending, and have fun attending any of the other sessions at the conference.